Wow. Just honestly, wow. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about The Warrior Prophet by R. Scott Bakker, which is book 2 in the Prince of Nothing trilogy, and has the later follow-up, the Aspect Emperor quadrilogy. And this quite legitimately, it may be my book of the year so far. It's certainly going to be in the running, I think, for the whole year. I enjoyed the first book, The Dark List, that comes before. I thought it was really interesting, the things being explored and the characters. It's kind of hard to root for any of the characters, but the world that's being set up, the prose, and just the way it lends itself so well to what the author is trying to accomplish worked really well for me. But then The Warrior Prophet just felt like everything was upped so much. The writing in here I thought was absolutely beautiful and just so effective. And with what we're exploring, both with the themes, the philosophy, the characters, and the plot, everything going on, this just was a phenomenal book. This is going to be, it is a book 2, and I don't often do videos for book 2s because it's hard to talk without spoilers. So I'm going to be talking and talking spoilers because I'm just going to be talking about some specific things. And quite honestly, it's going to be easier to just not have to censor myself and make this non-spoiler. So if you've not read this book and you've read the first one, read this one. It is... To me, I was looked around afterwards because I'm always curious to look at reviews after I finish a book. And I saw some people that were saying that they thought the first book was better. I don't understand that at all. The first book is very strong, but this book feels stronger in almost every way to me. It just was so good. So if you've read the first book and you're not sure if you want to continue, I highly recommend giving this one a shot. If you're not feeling it after this, then sure, quit. But I was blown away. Loved this so much. Definitely check it out. But we're just going to kind of talk in general about the book because I have a lot of things that I want to discuss. So the backdrop here, of course, set up in the first book is the Holy War. This, though, is where, we have, there's an initial battle in the first book, but this is where the Holy War is really going. And most of this is taking place, the crusade is actually happening, the travel, and everything that goes into that. And I think that the first thing I really want to note is the way that is shown with the crusade, the brutality of that, the dichotomy between this is this holy thing, this is for the God, and yet the brutality and the acts that could very well be considered evil if they weren't against heathens or you're not considering people, and just kind of exploring that. And it didn't feel like, to me at least, that we're really reveling in that or really doing any sort of inordinate focus on it, but it's something that is often overlooked. And if you look at the actual history and the terrible things that happen around crusades, and when you're going and you're doing this and you're saying that these people are evil and they're against us, and you bring religion into it, the way that changes people and the fervor that can happen with that. And so there's a lot of themes exploring those ideas of what really happens and how that can be manipulated. And that's one of the big things that's happening here is Kellis is using this to his advantage. He's manipulating these people. He's sort of like the reverse, chosen one, or the leader who's setting himself up as the titular warrior prophet, and using this religious further and making it seem like he is holy in leading them and using that. And I think the exploration there too about how that religious fervor can be used, it's something that is done. And I will note too, I've always been a big fan of the exploration of religion in fantasy. I think it's very interesting. There's a lot you can do with it. And so those elements, both with the current religion and also the fact that the no God from the ancient past, and all of these different magical schools, these different religions, I think they're done well. There's very obvious analogs here to our real world and religion, but things are explored and expanded upon, and that it doesn't feel like it's just a pure rip. But again, I saw some complaints in some reviews about some of the content around the crusade, and it is brutal and it is dark. And I mean, this series I think is always described as being just incredibly grim and dark, and fits very much so. But again, it's not at all. It didn't feel unrealistic. It felt like it's just being here's a real look at what would actually happen. We're not going to gloss over this and show our triumphant heroes going on the crusade. We're going to show what happens when just regular people go on, and the differences in what happens, and seeing the amount of casualties as they go along on the crusade as well, between just the battles and the just absolutely harrowing experience through the desert where they don't have water, which was just I keep feel like I keep saying the word brutal, but it fits so well. Seeing all of these people, seeing the differences too between the highborn and the lowborn, where the highborn are still generally doing okay to fine, but even they start to be impacted, showing you how severe this type of thing is. But also, again, it's the mindset, it's the level of desperation, and how that is all being manipulated by Kellis. And we've known from the first that Kellis is not just normal person. He is superhuman to some extent, being the Dunyane and having power. And then we're shown here in this book too that he's one of the few, and he has some sorcerer's power as well. But so much about what he's doing and what's talked about with his type of power is basically the idea of self and being able to see into other people and see into their real self and use that to manipulate. I also find that really fascinating because that's something that you sometimes will see in fantasy, but it's always like from the other perspective. It's the character that can see the true inner heart or that type of thing in other characters, but it's always somebody who's on the good side, so they can tell if somebody's truly good or if they can tell if somebody's truly bad. But this is totally different. This is Kellis who's using it completely to manipulate others. And the recurring thing where Naor is like the only person who's not really buying into it because of his hatred there, but even he gets manipulated as well, and you really see that. And we'll talk some characters a bit as well too, because the character arcs here I think were really fantastic. But just seeing that, I think that idea and the execution of that is done really phenomenally, and just seeing that kind of twisted view of that. And it's something that you don't often really get explored, but it is such a, like, obviously not quite with the power, but how many times in our own history has there been some demagogue who comes in and riles people up, gets them with violent fervor, whether it's religion, politics, whatever, and uses that, inflames those emotions, and puts together a mob, so to speak, and creates that type of thing. So we're seeing that type of figure really be a focus on, and usually in fantasy it's done pretty differently, where it's for good somebody's doing this. So I love seeing the flip side of that, and I think it's handled really well. And just Kellis too, where we're starting to see more of what he's really doing and like his plan coming in, but it's still not entirely clear what he intends to do by any means, because he's still in some ways unsure as well. Now there are a ton, I talked a little bit about religion, and there are a ton of religious parallels here between things that are happening here, especially with the setup of prophet and with the death later and kind of the sacrifice there. Although again, it's done in a way that it's not just a pure rip. With that sort of thing, and with Sejanus already being sort of a parallel to Jesus from the Christian religion and that type of thing, but seeing this new prophet and how that goes as well, a lot of those parallels, again, because religion is a big thing that's being explored here, and so it's looking at those, but seeing in a different way that they might come about, and also again how somebody could use that to manipulate everything. And so it's just this, it's exploring the parallels, but almost exploring just the antithesis of the idea that you normally see. It's what if we do this but completely on the other side, and it just makes for such an interesting and compelling read, just for those ideas alone. And I think that's something that Bakker does exceptionally well here, because the character journeys are very interesting. A lot of times you want to either be able to latch onto characters or be really into the plot or the world building. And I do think that Bakker writes strong characters, although not ones you necessarily are going to root for, but strong characters. Does a really good job with that. The world building has been phenomenal, basically since page 1 of the first book. But it's kind of that slow exploration, and there's a lot more plot, so to speak, here, because we're trying to go from A to B with the Crusades. We see a lot more of that here than we did in the first book as well. But it's just really the exploration of theme and looking at the philosophy and the ideas too of consciousness, which is a big theme that's explored here as well, where it's commented that Naor is really the only one who's like awake to his consciousness and to the world, and he's actually like realizing and seeing the choices he makes and being aware of them. And I think that's some powerful ideas to explore as well. And we're looking at again with like the people who are following in the Crusade in general and are just going there and following along, whether they are just the common soldiers or even the nobles who may have their own reasons. But again, it's easy to just go in and not really think about what you're doing, and then also Kellis using that to get people to be his followers. But you also see the moments moments of conflict between some other characters as well, where they are partially maybe aware or they're fighting against it to see. And you see that with Akamian, where he's really, really sucked in completely to Kellis, but then also is torn with how far do I go? Because Kellis wants to know the Gnosis, and that's something that Akamian and the Mandate Schoolmen are not ever supposed to share for any reason or do that type of thing. So how far will he go? Will he be willing to do that? Would he be willing to go that far? And we see that with some of the other people that are really just struggling with decisions and with their choices. And so it makes those even more powerful when we're exploring the people who aren't. Like Proyas, who's not necessarily like a huge character, but just seeing him and the exploration of he's torn between his religious ideals and loyalty to his friends, and the fact that, being friends, with Akamian as well is tough because Akamian's a heretic and a blasphemer, and what does he do there? With Zin as well, and his conflict there is just difficult. And so seeing that kind of the turmoil of choice there at so many other people who just aren't making any choices. And I think with Akuri Confus, a lot of really hard to pronounce words in this series, as well, being sort of the foil, the other side, but he's also just trying to get people completely riled up the other way. He's trying to really be the opposite of Kellis. And it's interesting because he starts as like the opposite of Neor, and that's kind of there, but then he starts to see the true danger being Kellis, and that's then where he goes and tries to get everyone there. So you have a lot of the foils and that type of thing as well. And it's interesting seeing what's done with the different plot lines and the different characters in so many different ways. So let's talk a little bit about characters, because there was some really, really great character arcs here. So the one I want to start with is Akamian, and Akka is... he's one of the characters that it's a little bit easier to be sympathetic to him, though he's not exactly one to like root for, so to speak. There aren't, like I said, there's not really any characters in here, which I imagine that if you're watching this video, you probably are well aware of that. But I thought his plotline was interesting because I talked a bit about, he is one who has the conflict. He's bought into Kellis. Completely sees him as the harbinger and basically going to be the savior and the harbinger of the second apocalypse, and so has that sort of unique view. But seeing the sort of the conflicts there as well with the capture and him being tortured, even though the Scarlet Spires seem to know that torture doesn't really work on the Mandate Schoolmen, even if they don't know why. I thought that was so interesting. All of the passages as well with Seswatha just being like, no, I don't know this man, I don't care. When they brought in Zin and they're torturing it, and how hard that is for Akka, even though he can't help it. And he comes out sort of like a different man and kind of broken in some ways. But between that and earlier in the library when he was first captured, just kind of seeing him use the Gnosis and him just actually being kind of badass and like having his own brutality. We're told so often, and in many ways he very much is, how he's seen as weak, and he is a kind of a weak man, subject to his vices, everything with him in Esmenet too, where he just feels very dependent on her. So seeing kind of another side of him I thought was interesting. But again, being conflicted with, even then, it's Seswatha who's really the strong one, not him at all. He's the one who's just sort of along for the ride. And then the whole escape, again, using the Gnosis and all of that going on, just to then come back, and it seems that it was engineered by Kellis too, because the doll is what ends up freeing him, and it heard its name spoken, and that's calling back to the test that was to determine if Kellis was able to use sorcery, that sort of thing, because ultimately that seems to also be part of Kellis's plan. He wanted him gone, his seduction of Esmenet, and then to have that Akka come back in that moment, and you knew it was coming from the start of that plotline. You knew it was coming, and then it still is just like seeing him come back and be kind of crushed all over again after he's shown to be, maybe has more strength, more resolve, and then still be crushed. But it's so interesting thinking about what he's going to end up doing, especially in the next book, where his loyalties are really going to lie, because he now kind of hates Kellis, still sees him as the savior, but also the kind of the twists with the consult too, and with Kellis apparently being able to know all along who they were, but not having said anything. With Neor just straight up figuring it out too, which we're definitely going to talk about Neor. So there's a lot going on there. And Well, we'll do Naor next because his plotline also was, I feel like, one of the stronger ones, and he is not a sympathetic character really at all, but just especially the standoff and the kind of the confrontation between him and Kellis, where it really comes down to the bone of it, and he's struggling with his conflicted sexuality and the ideals from his people, especially on the step of what makes a man, and that's very, very rigidly defined. And again, looking at that idea of masculinity, and it's very rigidly defined, and so he can't allow it. But he also, had a relationship with MOINES, Kellis' father, and kind of sees Kellis as sort of that proxy, and that's why he's still able to be manipulated. And it's the full confirmation too of his holding on to Serway being his proof. It's not just his proof, his prize that he conquests, but his proof that he's not gonna be looking at Nen, and that he really is. It's no, because it's Serway, she's so beautiful. That's his proof, and why he's able to be manipulated by her and just feel the absolute need to specifically just have her and have that proof, because that's so important to him and his psyche, and kind of coming to those conclusions and trying to just have Kellis kill him. And Kellis, I think that's the interesting thing. That's one of the few kind of human moments where it seems like he's been worried about him, and worried about him being the only one who could potentially ruin some things, and yet chooses not to kill him. So I think that was a really interesting moment as the capstone there. But that scene was just so powerful and so compelling to read. And then Naor as he goes along too. And I think Naor as well was very involved in a lot of the battle scenes, and just seeing him actually display being a general and why he's very intelligent and well-versed in war, with war being like what he lives for and his people in general. And so I really liked the look of that. And it was one of the times where sometimes authors write a character that's supposed to be this fantastic general, but what they actually do doesn't seem to make that much sense, or they don't really seem to actually be that good, but you're just told that they are. And I feel like it's here, the big picture, what he's looking at with reading the different people and being able, what he's able to surmise, the bigger things he's able to see too with it. And it's things fall apart largely because people aren't listening to him, and not because he's doing a bad job. And so I like getting to see some of those things, and I think the action sequences here were really strong as well. But then at the end, and his confrontation with the consul was also just so good. And again, another time I did kind of expect him to die, and he's still pulling through somehow. But just that was such a good confrontation as well. And another really, really powerful moment here. And then, of course, we have to talk about Esmenet, who has a very strong arc in this book. And there's a lot going on with that character and with what's really being explored there. And again, she ends up being manipulated by Kellis as well. But her agency, or lack thereof, is explored quite a lot. And she's historically felt like she didn't really have any agency. She was trapped into the life that she was done. She was trapped into the decisions that she made, including, finding out what really happened to her daughter, which I feel like had been implied, but not outright stated until this book. And so finding that out too, and the things that she's done, and her excuse has always kind of been that she had no choice, she had no agency, she did what she had to do. But she starts to feel like she maybe does have a little bit more power, because she's with a commune, and she does, I feel like, in some ways love him, but it's also just kind of what he represents, because the other people she's been involved with, are people who want to dominate and want her submission and be the one in power. Whereas a commune who she sees as being weak, she's really the one who's kind of in control in a lot of ways, but she still has her insecurities about the life. What if he grows tired with her, which Kellis plays into as well. But so it's kind of her finding agency, but then there are a lot of questions on those agencies when she again is pulled in to everything going on with Kellis, and he seems to have a lot of use for her. And it's very interesting because Serway, who was extremely easy to manipulate for her own reasons as well, and we've seen that, just her entire, just like every fiber of her is completely just ingrained with what he wants from her. And Esmenet is a very different character, but able to be pulled in as well and manipulated still too. And so it'll be really interesting to see, because it's that kind of journey with finding agency and then starting to lose that agency again. I think is really compelling, and it's the treatment of Esmenet and Serway and just women in the series in general is, again, it's something that I totally understand that it can be difficult to read with what's happening there, and just the talks about the just regular normalized atrocities that you have on a crusade and in war and that type of thing. But it's really exploring the treatment of women and what's kind of normal in fantasy, and that so often is the place too where the women are just meant to be either the secondary characters or submissive to the male people. They just exist to be the wife or the sex object or the love interest or whatever. And so we're kind of really exploring that in a very aware way, that as we're looking to see what's really happening here, and seeing it again with the lens of Kellis, but also the consult and what they do to both Esmenet and Serway, and all of these different things in the exploration of these women trying to get by and just trying to make it in their own ways. So I think that's fascinating. And to me as well, with seeing the sort of the idea of submission seems to be something here as well, because Kellis is manipulating everybody, trying to get them to submit to his will. In the first book, that far back too, with Akiri Conthus and the Emperor who wanting to have the indenture and wanting everybody to submit to his will in order to have this happen. The church wanting everybody, to go there. So there's all of these different people that are trying to take the position of power and have everyone submit to them. And as I started seeing too, the bigger picture of the crusade, the people being pulled under the sway of Kellis, we're seeing that in the big picture, but we were seeing that in the small picture with the treatment of Esmenet, especially, I feel like, and Serway as well, who was kind of further down that line. But seeing the seduction that's done there, but for all of the people in general, to pull them in, get them to submit to his will. And so we're seeing sort of the microcosm with these individual characters and the look of the world and the bigger picture as well with what's happening, which I also just thought was a really interesting way to explore some of those ideas. And it's still, all of the ideas that are being explored are still very much present. With the ideas, we continue to explore the ideas of masculinity and how toxic that can be within a person and the turmoil that can cause. The idea of self and the idea of consciousness and being, really aware of the world, I think, are explored very deeply here also. And we start to really see that. And then again, it's just looking at the all of these things with the backdrop of the crusade, I just think was really genius and is really, really, really well done, because you see all of these ideas that fit so well with this, and with the idea of a holy war and going along, and all of the people just not really making decisions because it's easier to go along. It also, begins to show why people are capable of the acts that they are in war or in this type of thing, because they're not thinking. It's just the enemy. The enemy aren't people. We're people, and that kind of us versus them mentality, which, again, as we've seen through history in our own world, can cause people to do truly horrific things. And that's being shown here. It's not being glossed over. Bakker is really showing you the depravity that humanity is capable of, and especially with showing you especially when it's manipulated and used for somebody else's own devices, and what potentially can happen there. We definitely have some things starting up, continuing, with the ideas of the logos and the shortest path, and the next book being the thousandfold thought, which isn't really explored here, but is mentioned here as well. So I'm interested to see where we go from here. But just, I feel like I could talk for hours. There was just so much, and I feel like I barely scratched the surface with talking about some of the themes being explored here and everything being done. But I really was blown away by this book. Like I said, I haven't actually gone back to look at everything I've read, but I think this may legitimately be book of the year so far. And it'll be tough to beat throughout the rest of the year. I'm very, very excited to get to the third book. I have heard it's not as good as the second book, but then I'm definitely going to be planning to continue on into Aspect Emperor, hopefully this year as well, just because I've heard The Judging Eye is the next one that's like will blow even this out of the water, and I'm so 100% sold on this series. It's definitely a series that's not going to work for everyone, both with the writing style and the pace, the prose, and the content. It's not going to work for everyone, and I had a lot of reservations on whether or not it was going to work for me, just because of the things that I've heard about it. But Bakker is just such a phenomenal writer. The writing is just wonderful to read. His prose is fantastic. He has the really elevated moments, which is some beautiful passages and ways of describing things. He's very intentional in his word choice as well. Something I actually forgot to mention, but it goes along with the ideas of kind of looking at the treatment of women in this world and in fantasy and in our world, and also with the idea of the bigger picture. He uses a lot of very intentional words that evoke, to me at least, evoke a really specific feeling, where he's trying to show, and I feel like reinforce that in that treatment in the bigger picture way. It's very intentional with word choices. There's also just besides that too, a really small thing, but just that really stuck out to me in this book. In one of the first like really big battle, just the comment that the people of the Holy War, they were surprised that the enemy fought with as much ferocity as they did, or something to that effect. I'm probably not quoting that exactly, but just the idea that they feel like they have this righteous anger, and they're so zealous to go on, and God is with them, and so they're surprised that the other people seem to be fighting just as hard for their side and for their beliefs. And there's just so many fantastic lines, both big and small, throughout here, and that's just the whole thing. Is the writing is just so amazing. It makes this such a joy to read, despite what the content is. That's a huge thing, but just the ideas being explored, the way they're being done, the execution, I just think was perfect. This was just such a phenomenal book. Absolutely, like a 7 out of 5. 5 stars not enough sort of book. I am so invested now in seeing not only where this goes, but just seeing what more Bakker's going to do. So I cannot wait to continue. I'm going to end now, though. I feel like I've gone on probably long enough here, but definitely let me know. I'd love to continue the conversation. So in the comments, let me know. Also, we could chat in Discord. Would be happy to do so as well. So definitely let me know your thoughts on this one in the series in general, because yeah, there's so much more to talk about. But that's gonna be it for this one. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description as always for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Discord if you want to chat about books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.